Good
Thank you.
afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I wanted to thank Nancy for sharing some time with us. It's very appropriate that it's around International Women's Week. I will say we're delighted to have you here because I wasn't aware of the superlative work you do, and how much you've done in a short space of time. When I first started, looking into your life, an opening statement said that Nancy Medina is breaking stereotypes around homelessness and to build a more empathetic community around Toulouse. So I think that's very much a sweeping statement and does sum up the good work you are doing, great work you are doing. You're obviously highly educated, a BA and MA in linguistics, a doctorate, a PhD. It seems that there's no end to your talents. So I suppose to kick off, obviously, there was a significant journey from Colombia to teaching linguistics and doing a doctorate in Columbia University. To kick off, could you tell us a little bit about your family, your background, maybe your parents or your mother and father, and what influence they had on your life, and how, I suppose, if there was any empowerment there from them to ignite this humanitarian passion in you?
Yeah, so good morning, everyone. Good afternoon for you. Well, this is morning here in Colombia. We've got like a 6 hours difference. So
Morning.
first of all, yeah. So first of all, I'd like to acknowledge all the beautiful work you're doing, working with communities. As I was speaking earlier, I know that it takes a lot of love first. In the first place, there's a lot of love, a lot of persistence, a lot of resilience as well, because when we work with communities and we engage into different kinds of societal issues we may want to address, so it takes a lot of persistence and patience and self-care as well. So I'm really glad to be here to share some of my understandings on some parts of my life journey that have allowed me to grow as a human being. And if you don't mind, Karen, we can share the presentation, because I usually like to start my dialogues honoring our ancestors, honoring the communities we're coming from, honoring, in my case, I like to honor all the social leaders that have been working with the human rights, that have been defending, the rights of the land, the rights of human beings, the rights of the LGBTQI communities. And what you are seeing here is different pictures of different communities that have embraced me and that I have belonged to in different parts of my life journey, like my research group, member students in Colombia, some of my peers in the US, my mentors, Elisa Facio on the bottom left, who passed a couple of years ago. And then the indigenous circle I am part of, like 4 years ago, they embraced me and they have allowed me to develop different understandings from around the world. So I bring this principle into our dialogue. It's a Mayan principle, an indigenous community that resides mostly in Mexico, but it resonates with the indigenous communities in Colombia, who think of themselves as communal beings, who thinks of themselves as a we instead of an I, right? So in my personal life, in everything that I do, I bring this principle and I try to understand it better, and more than understand it, I try to put it into practice. So in La Quec, you are my other self, say the Maya, and that what that means is that if I hurt you, I hurt myself. If I respect and love you, I am respecting and loving myself as well, right? So yeah, so welcome to this space of dialogue. I'd like to honor, as I was mentioning before, our ancestors, even though we might not be cognizant or we don't have present where we are coming from, or probably some of our roots, but in our DNAs, we carry a lot of history and a lot of ancestry, you know, that is manifested in different ways in our humanities. So if we can go to the next slide, please, Karen, thank you so much. So yeah, you can see some all of the other organizations, my research group, Juventas, and this is to the communities that is still, that we have lost too soon, to the lives of those who we have lost too soon, and to the communities that resist. The next one, please. So where am I coming from? So I am from a Latin America country that is called Colombia. So it is located in South America. And there we can see, you're invited to come, right? So we're not that close, but you're welcome anytime. And then Bogota is the capital. And then on the left, you're seeing some of the images that represent like the nature, beauty and richness that we have in the country. As you can see, Colombia is surrounded by the two oceans, the Pacific Ocean in the west and the Atlantic Ocean on the north. And then we have two islands that are part of our country as well. We have San Andres and Providencia. Those are two islands on the northern part of the country that also adds to the richness of who we are as Colombian citizens. And one particularity of the islands is that they speak Creole, you know, the mixture between English and Spanish. So that's pretty interesting for us as a nation. And then in Colombia, our main language is Spanish. So in the inlands or in the rest of the territory, we speak Spanish. And then we are surrounded by our neighbor countries, Venezuela, Ecuador, Peru, Brazil, and that adds to the richness as well of the diversity that we have, because historically speaking, we used to be one nation. So Venezuela, Ecuador, Peru, we were only one nation. And afterwards, so we got divided. So that's why you find the same colors in the flags of our countries, like yellow, red, and blue. So in Venezuela, they've got stars. In Colombia, we've got a different kind of elements or symbols that represent our nation. So we cannot go to the next slide. And then we can continue seeing now, this is the region where I am located. So I am in the Andean region, which means that we are surrounded by mountains and the weather is rainy. So that's the beauty of Colombia as well. So that territory is divided into 5 geographical regions. So that means that we have the plains with the hot, warm weather. We have, you know, the inlands with the cold and cold weather. And then we've got the two coasts, and then we have the Amazon region as well, which adds a lot of biodiversity to our country. So this is the city. This is a historical city. The place where I am at is where the independence for Colombia was got from the Spaniards. So that's a department or a state very rich of culture and history. So we can go to the next slide, please. And then I work for a public university, and these are some images of the university. It's a pedagogical and technological university. We've got 4 branches in different cities nearby, and we also have like some education that we offer you know, to rural communities through distance education. So we have 11 faculties that range between education, engineering, and law, and arts is going to be our new faculty in the coming years. So we've got like a different diverse richness. Next, please. Thank you so much. So as a country, we are very diverse. And then you can see that we, okay, so I'm gonna show you a couple of short videos. So for you to get a sense of what it looks and what it feels like to be in Colombia. So if you don't mind to click on play, Karen, so that we can see this first video. So the previous one was about a video. I don't know if we can see it. So if you can go backward a little bit because we're advancing.
Is that okay, or do you want me to move on, Nancy?
Karen, you are going ahead. You are right at the end of the presentation.
No worries. Tell me when to stop.
Yeah, please go back to the previews.
Right, that was the previous one, but I don't see a link to take me to a video.
The previous one, there is like a short video. You started to play it, but we couldn't listen to the audio part. So if we're having difficulties with the videos, we can leave them for afterwards. But I wanted to get you a sense of what it looks like to live in Colombia and the beauty of the landscapes. Yes, you can click that one probably.
Press this one.
Okay, yeah. So I don't know why it moves to the next slide. Yeah, you can go backward.
Sorry, I cannot see how to get a video to play.
Okay, so that's okay. So you can leave it here. Let's leave it here, Karen. That's okay. So anyways, in Colombia, it's very important for us to think of ourselves. One of the, let's say as citizens, one of the tasks we have invested on lately is being more mindful about how diverse we are, right? So we have African roots in our blood, right? And enslavement brought like all these, rhythms and the beat of the drums and the different foods and the traditions and the color of our skin. But also when Spaniards came into Colombia, we were already more than 300 indigenous communities, and today we only have 62, right? And that represents a loss in culture, a loss in the languages that we speak. So you can see some of the indigenous communities that are part of my country, but we are also, so we are indigenous, we are African, and we are the mixture with the Spaniards. And then we are also peasants, we are also campesinos, we are also invested in all this rural community work. And we are, at the end of the day, mestizos or mestizas, which means that we are the mixture of different cultures, right? So as a nation, we need to start like exploring a little bit who we are, where we are coming from, what are our roots. And then that's part of the national dialogue that we are having as part of the peace agreements assignment and all of that. So one of the principles that the indigenous communities teach us is this principle of the good living, right? El buen vivir. So how we think, as I was saying before, in terms, we think of a we instead of an I, right? Okay, so we can go to the next one, and then you can meet and probably see an episode of my life. And then this brings this title of Hands to the Soil. So this goes back to a memory when I was a child, and my parents always tell me that when I was 3 years old, they had a little farm where they were growing potatoes. And every time that I came into, that area of land or that piece of land where they were growing potatoes, I would kneel down, start digging in the soil, and then I said, hands to the soil, right? And then my mom used to say that the smallest potatoes that I could obtain were the potatoes that I would eat. So I wouldn't ask my mom just to prepare, but other potatoes rather, or different from the smallest ones that I could get, right? So why is this important to me? Like, as I have started to grow and get educated, as their mom was saying, I've had opportunities to get educated. So I've been becoming more aware of the importance of working to communities, of going back to my roots, right? And it brings me back to that story of hands to the soil. So what I see, or how I see my life, or my mission of life, my philosophy of life, is learning to acquire the tools to serve. So learning so that we can improve the conditions of our communities, right? And learning so that we can, create more critical, more empathetic communities. That's my end goal at the end of the day, right? So probably you can click on next, Karen, or enter. So yeah, that's me and my brothers, my two brothers. So I'm the oldest of four. And then in the next one, you can see my sister. So it is 4 of us in total, right? So yeah, I'm the one in the middle. So yeah, a huge responsibility to be the oldest. And then you've got a generation of my nephews and my nieces still cultivating the land. This is a piece of land that my parents currently have. And the next one, in the next one, you can see my whole family. I mean, brothers, sisters, siblings, nephews, nieces. Aside from my aunts and cousins don't appear in here, but these are like my closest relative members. And you can see how diverse we are, how different we look, yeah, and how we are still, you know, tied to the land. So Dermot was asking me about my parents and how they influence in my life and the work that I do. So what I have learned from my grandparents and my parents is how to be leaders and serve the communities. So my dad, who you see there with the yellow and blue jacket and the hat, so he's been serving, you know, as organizing the neighborhoods communities. So he's been the president of associations. So he's been very active. If I go back to the stories of my grandparents, they were also organizing peasants and they were also demanding for rights. My grandparents on my mom's side were displaced because of the violence in the territory, so they had to abandon the land. So we have also that part of our history. My mom and female and women in my family have got a strong role in how to keep families together on the one hand, but also the strength also to defend the rights of the communities. My mom's role plays a major role in religious communities. So she's a Catholic, my family is Catholic. So she mostly through Catholicism and church does a lot of service to different communities. So what I have got from my families and my ancestors and how I translate it into my work is this, you know, pride of being peasants, is the hardworking, you know, kind of value, is bringing honesty and serving communities as part of the values that I still bring into academia and research today. And this reminder of how to be kind to one another. So we, of course, we are not a perfect family. We have our issues and we have our struggles. And we, of course, don't agree 100% on our vision of the world. But when it comes to support one another, so we are right there, right? Like we are right there and we just come back and support. So that's a little bit of what the question you were asking, Dermot, about things that inform our values that inform my work. I don't know if you've got another question.
Yeah, I suppose just before I move on, you mentioned you know, the religious work you have done. Um, from my own experience as a gay man, um, often religion can be used as a rationale for discrimination, you know, maybe in the Muslim community, certainly in the Catholic community. How do you reconcile yourself with that? I don't know your religious beliefs or your religious faith, but you know, it's obviously at times can be a barrier because people use it as justification for discrimination.
Yeah. So what has given me peace to my soul has been approaching precisely Chicana Latina feminism and indigenous knowledges. When we talk to certain indigenous communities and through the indigenous circle, and we start speaking about diversity in terms of sexual orientation, and our identities of how we portray ourselves, sexual identity. So I came to peace because they speak about LGBTQI members as two-spirited people. And for some indigenous communities, two-spirited people represent wisdom, represent the balance between the male and the female, and they are welcomed and embraced in their communities. So in Colombia, it's still a huge deal and a big challenge, you know, to be diverse in terms of sexual orientation and sexual identity, because we are mostly Catholic. And then if we also have Protestant churches, and those churches, of course, they also speak, you know, in what terms they speak about, you know, those of us who are diverse. So I think that that's a big deal amongst families. You know, the conversation is pretty tough. Societally speaking, there's a lot of homophobia. But then I think that the part of the work for LGBTQI community is starting to heal ourselves first, like listen to the voices of who we can really be and become, embrace all those little parts that have been fragmented by society, and reconcile all those elements of what religious people, not religion itself, because religion, if we go back to the principle of love that has been promoted, or that was the teaching, one of the main teachings of Jesus, right? So if we go back to the love principle, so then we are like pretty much like sons and daughters of God, and under this commandment of love, there's nothing else beyond that, right? And then of course, like institutions, the churches as institutions have been instilling these certain, ideas so that we can establish hierarchies and discrimination and all of that. So it's pretty tough to live in a country like Colombia, where there's a lot of homophobia, to be part of institutions, educational institutions that are homophobic as well, because who can we be at the end of the day, and how can we embrace our lives fully, right? It's a very complex, conversation. Like, even if we think it twice if we want to have a certain kind of family, and there's people discriminated all the time, so it's pretty tough. So I think that the kind of work that we still need to do is internal work, like strengthening ourselves, loving ourselves, emphasizing all those dimensions, and in the near circles of the support nets that we are able to create, try to be more safe, feel a little bit safer, and be a little bit more open. But most people stay, more reserved about certain things in certain contexts because of how hard the conversation still is in Colombia.
So do you think diversity and religion will ever, sit together well? Because can you be religious and be tolerant of diversity?
That's the hard work, that's the hard conversation. So and I think that part of what I do through my work, at the university level, for example, is offering different scenarios where we can connect through our humanities, where we can listen to our voices, listen to our experiences, and say, hey, like, we are not different. Like, we find similar emotions, we find similar struggles. The only thing that makes us different is how we want to represent our identity and how we love, right? So what I do at an institutional level is, like, for example, in 2019, I was doing different workshops speaking about the body as a site of place, the body as a site of knowledge. And then I was bringing, my African American friends, and I was bringing like ecofeminists, and then I was bringing leaders, female leaders in the territories, to speak about these different, perspectives and dimensions, so that we could really listen to one another. And through the stories, that's the power of stories. That's the power of testimonials. So when we listen to one another and our stories, we can acknowledge and hopefully, connect as human beings without, putting labels on ourselves. So that's why I have a hard time with labeling ourselves. Even if I say that I'm a woman, I am not like any other woman, right? Even if I say that I'm Latin American, I am not like any other Latin American person. There's traits that make us unique as individuals, and that is that uniqueness, the one that I need to embrace. And that is my role in the spaces that I occupy, is really raising awareness and connecting people to our stories, and really listen to us from the heart. Listen to us from the heart, right? So I don't know, and I don't expect, the institutions and religious institutions to hopefully change. It's very hard, because those are systems that are so entrenched in our culture, so entrenched in our histories, that what I expect, at least, is that the communities that I'm being part of, to raise awareness about being respectful to whatever person's journey, right? Like, we don't have the right to tell anyone anything about their journey, because what I tell my pre-service teachers is, life in itself it's already so hard for every individual, right? and we've got our psychological issues going, and our weaknesses and our strengths and our fears. So my life by itself is already so hard to believe by itself, that I cannot become a burden to another person's life and experience on this dimension, right? On this earthly dimension. So that's what I try to do, that's raising awareness, connecting, hopefully diminishing hatred, diminishing discrimination by bringing stories into place.
Okay. Yeah, I would say from the Matt Albert perspective, one of the key strengths is the diversity there, the different life experiences, both bad and good. And, you know, we are a diverse group of individuals, and everybody has something to bring to the table. Everybody has, various different strengths, whether they're aware of them or not. But I think that makes the whole dynamic work very well. Um, you obviously mentioned that you were from a farming background, and that your parents were active in social justice. Um, how did your education journey begin? Because I would imagine, it's, as I alluded to earlier, a long path from rural Colombia to Washington State University. Um, Perhaps you might tell us a little about how you empowered yourself via education.
Yeah, that's a very important question, because yeah, I was born and raised in a small coal mining town, right? So for people in my generation in the 1990s, so the expectation of women was to stay home, to marry a minor, to get pregnant, and that was it. That was like my predestined, future as a woman in that little town, right? So fortunately speaking, like I've got this ability in academia, right? And then when I graduated from my high school, my mom said to my dad, like, hey, like this girl is not gonna stay home cooking, and we have to give her an opportunity to go to university, and then it was because of my mom's insistence and persistence, and then my dad also gave me the opportunity to buy one form, and apply for the public university of the region, which is the one that I'm working for now. And then when I passed my papers, I was given this opportunity to enter the university, right? So I entered the university to do my undergrad in language teaching, and then I was 15 years old. So you had this girl coming from a small mining town into a bigger city, and facing all the challenges, of course, of discrimination because of my rural roots and everything. And then starting to build this identity and walk this path, and also challenge my own fears and my own, insecurities, and being able to pursue a degree as an educator in the country, and from there on building my path, like I got scholarships. So my parents gave me the opportunity and paid for the first semester. And then afterwards, I started to get scholarships because of my scores, my academic,
Okay.
performance. So then I
Hmm.
started getting scholarships, and then I did my master's and I could work, and then I got another scholarship to go to the US. So yeah, so that's an important thing. Like it is doable, but then the expectation for rural communities and girls from small towns still is like, hey, like you cannot do it. So for me, it was like given, like I always tell my students, like there's one opportunity that you're being given, and then hopefully inside yourself what to do with that opportunity and how to build your path.
Okay. And do you think that was, because I know from my own experience, you know, m- you know, my path to education was definitely driven by my parents, well, my mother in particular. So obviously your parents were supportive and encouraged you. There were financial barriers. So do you think it's to do with, a supportive parental, you know, environment pushing you on, or do you think it was more in yourself to say, I want more than this? Because obviously there would be girls in similar circumstances. So I suppose what differentiated you from, going along with what was expected, which was married with children and a homemaker and pregnant and all that, to striving for more? Um, you know, do you think it was your parents or your own drive or a combination of both? So I suppose looking at a girl in similar circumstances, there would be barriers, but what made you rise above those barriers, whether they be financial or otherwise?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. Like I first, because if my parents hadn't given me, the financial support at the beginning, so I wouldn't have been able to apply to the university and then entering the university. And then I was pretty young when I started the university. I was 15 years old, and then like it was pretty much on me every decision that I made. Like I didn't have my parents to control me or guide me or anything very close because we lived far from the city. So then I think that it was part of my also love and passion for learning languages, which was that brought me into pursuing my degree. Because of course I experienced a lot of challenges at the university, the peer pressure and the discrimination for being coming from a rural area, and then all the world of alcohol and drugs, in public universities. So we are exposed as youngsters to sex, drugs, and rock and roll, let's say it. But it is like all this alcohol environment, and drug things, and then the party life. So it was pretty much on me what I wanted to do, and also sex, so I could have been pregnant by 15, and then probably I would have had a different destiny. But I think it's a combination of multiple things, like personality probably as well.
Hmm.
What I also within my values, like I said, okay, I want to be a mom, but I don't want to be a mom now because I don't have economic stability. I want to have, so then in my mind, since an early age, I've been wanting to be mom, and then I've been wanting to plan it, and probably that's part of the reasons why I wanted to get educated, to get more economic stability so that I could have a family, right? So there's
Okay.
multiple things going on in terms of that.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe definitely, our role as a parent is to push children on and to make sure they reach their full potential. You know. Um, so I know you've done a BA and an MA in language teaching. So I was interested in what languages you speak, and do you feel that being multilingual has opened doors for you?
And the second part of the question is, can you repeat it? If I
Sorry,
think being
excuse me.
multilingual.
Yeah, so you're
Yeah,
mu- you I was interested in what languages you speak, and do you feel that that has opened doors for you with regards to opportunities?
hmm yeah, I just speak English and Spanish. That's all I
Okay.
speak.
Okay.
But definitely, like speaking English has opened me a whole new door into, first of all, other worlds through language, like reading and having access to different materials and sources. I have been able to acknowledge and embrace other cultures, right? And of course, speaking English has allowed me to apply to scholarships. So I've been to Malaysia, I've been to the US has been my longest experience, meaningful experience. And of course, I could pursue my Fulbright scholarship, right, as part of this experience. So yeah, so being multilingual has allowed me to approach other cultures and grow. Because the experience in the US for me was like life changing in terms of my identity, how I think about myself, and then the kind of work that I used to do in Colombia before, and how I came back more empowered with a richness of knowledge and a richness of language to make sense of what I was doing here in Colombia.
Okay. Um, I was very interested as well in the knowledge and action program that you started. Um, how can you tell us a little about that? Because what I found fascinating about it was there was a huge emphasis on humanitarianism and social responsibility you know, for teachers that were obviously volunteering their time without payment. You know, their payment was the knowledge that they were contributing to society. So I found that fascinating. I suppose I'm interested in, you know, the individuals that were involved. There was an awful lot of displacement. So I'm curious with regard to how you made that program work, you know, because obviously if people are displaced, it can be difficult to coordinate a program like that and have continuity.
Mhm. Yeah, we partner with an NGO in Colombia, in the city where I live, Tunja. It's an NGO that is called Juventas, and they had like different services or programs offered to displaced youth and children that were coming from different parts of the Colombian territory. And then they were needing back in the day in the 2010, 2012, they were needing like to create a language school program. So then since that was our strength in the languages school, so then I said, hey, like we can contribute with the language school program. And then initially we designed like the syllabi, the curriculum and all of that. And then with the members of my research group, like we're 5 back in the day. So we started like going to the different spaces and teach English to children and youth, right? And then we were not enough, so then I started to create this volunteer kind of opportunity for language school students at the university, and that was an open call. And then I was inviting all the students of the university and I was of the languages school, and then I was telling, hey, there's this opportunity to really serve the community. You will not have a grade, you will not get paid, you will not like receive all this in return. So I'm sorry, but we don't have like economic resources, or I don't know, we cannot give you a score. And then I was inviting everyone, and then we had like 70 volunteers, you know, going for a period of over 3 years, coming and going, exchanging with kids. And then part of what they gained was their transformation in the ways they thought of themselves as teachers. So once they had that volunteer experience, they say like, hey, like this is the kind of teacher I want to be, like the kind of teacher who listens, the kind of teacher who cares, the kind of teacher who, despite all the, you know, languages that I speak, because my students speak French, German, English. So then they said like, it's teaching languages in Colombia is not about teaching how to speak and write. It is about how to get a smile in a face of a child, a displaced child. So we could see those changes in children. Like we had this particular, we have a picture of this kid, and Daisy, one of our members of the research group, and for her was so powerful that 3 months back, this kid was so sad and he was like, didn't used to speak, and he had a lot of problems in the family. But after the 3 months that we were working with him, he had this huge smile in his face receiving his diploma. And that was like, for us, has been as an image, like has stayed with us for since 2012. Like for us as a group, as human beings, like since 2012 we have the image of that kid in our faces. And I think that that's part of my work also, being at a university, you know, teacher trainer, is like offering opportunities and showing other alternatives, and really allowing, inviting my students and future teachers in Colombia to think like, hey, what is the purpose of teaching? What for teaching English or French in Colombia? I don't know. So that's what this opportunity of Juventus and the research group Key and Knowledge in Action has offered us.
It's wonderful. Like um, to have such, humanitarianism in a world full of narcissism and apathy. It's so refreshing to hear that. I don't want to hog the whole show, so I'm sure other people have questions. So I just wanted to put it out there if anybody wanted to ask you something on an individual basis. The floor is
Dermot,
open.
thank you very much, Dermot. No, it's been great and it's been fascinating, and there's so many questions and so little time. But it's something that emerged quite a lot, and even like since the beginning of the conversation, is the issue of identity. And I know you've done a lot of work on identity as well, Nancy. And identity is something that we can all relate to, and even on an individual basis as well as in our community center, because we understand that creating a positive identity is part of the recovery and the rehabilitation process. But as I said, individually as well is extremely relevant. So what can you tell us about your work on identity in different community? And I think, yeah, this would also lead to the next question. But yes, thank you.
Yeah, that is most of my work, recent work in the last probably 10 years, has focused on exploring how we build identity, how complex it is for us to be, what are the layers of our identity construction. And, part of I'm going to talk a little bit about how neoliberal, the neoliberal conception of how societies operates impose on us this narrative or rhetoric of what is normal and what is abnormal, right? What is good and what is bad, who's a good human being, who's a bad human being. So they put us into these binaries that start classifying us as humans in society. And then I've been interested in making more complex the narrative of who we are, right? And then there is this powerful woman, Gloria Anzaldúa. And then I have an image, Karen, in the PowerPoint presentation, maybe if we can go to that slide. So for Gloria Anzaldúa, identity is always a construction, right? So we are not the same people all the time. So the Nancy version you are seeing today is not the same Nancy who's gonna become after this dialogue, right? Because your questions, because your presence, because how you have allowed me to think out aloud of the things that I've been working on is giving me a new comprehension or understanding of the paths we have been walking, right? So that's why I define myself as a human being under construction, right? Because that's the only expression that makes sense to myself, right? I'm constantly changing and evolving in the things, in the ways I relate, in the ways I make meaning of the things that I do, in the ways I see my role that is being played as a mom, as a daughter, as an aunt, as a godmother, as a sister, as a friend, right? So I'm constantly revising and revisiting everything that I am and what I was and what I want to become, right? So then this image is so powerful to me because I know, and I'm pretty sure, and I'd like to ask you all, if you have ever felt fragmented, have you ever felt fragmented? So if you can just write a word yes or no in the chat. So have you ever felt discriminated? Have you ever felt like rejected? Or have you ever felt that you are in the darkness and that you don't know what the way out is, right? So I think that all of us have been into those different places, right? We have been in the dark, right? So what Gloria Anzaldúa allowed me to understand is that I might be in the dark, but I might not stay necessarily in the dark. So when we are in the dark, we feel frustration and we feel sadness and we feel that we don't belong and we don't find a purpose in our lives. And we will even think of suicidal thoughts like, I don't feel worth of being on this earth. Like, so I feel all this confusion, and that's normal. You know, that's part of our journey on this earth. That's what we, or why we came here for, right? Is to really experience all of these elements so that we can really transform and change and move into a different stage. So for Gloria Anzaldúa, you can see here in the circle in the center. So those are all our body parts fragmented, right? So that's when we experience where we are confused, right? Or in confusion, like we don't feel that we are a whole self, right? But once we are able to step or give a step beyond the darkness, we start to see the new meaning and we start to reconstruct ourselves. So that is the image by the bottom back. So after every challenge, every struggle that we experience in our lives, we come up as a new human being, a new construction of ourselves with new meanings, with new messages, with new understandings. Not perfect, of course. We will never, and perfection for me is not something that I'm looking for. So yeah, so we will of course get into more trouble. So I'm sorry to say this, but life Life is about that, like little challenges and little stations, and we might come to a space of peace for a little while, and then we find ourselves in shaking sand again. So okay, so what's the lesson here? What's the new learning here? Why haven't I learned? It's like the kind of questions that I ask when a situation repeats in my life, and I say, oh my God, so what's going on? What haven't I been able to learn? So what is it in here, right? So then, and then I take and I experience the situation from that learning standpoint, right? So through all this identity construction, so I have been able to understand that as human beings, we are complex, that we operate at different layers, and that the body, the emotions, and that's why it is something that I bring in academia, because in academia, it's more our cognitive dimension, the one that is favored. And if you are a person who is very articulate and who can recite a number of authors and who can recite a number of theories, so that's when you are worth it, right? So, but then what I'm saying to my students in academia now is like, hey, so we are, as Facio, Elisa Facio and Irene Lara are two Chicana Latina feminists, and they say, like, hey, we are mind, body, and spirits. Okay, so let's bring it all together. We are mind, body, and spirits. And as Aldua reminds us, our bodies are our grounds of thought. Our emotions are our places of knowledge, right? So we need to be patient with ourselves, and we need to allow ourselves to reconstruct a self that is mind, body, and spirit. So that's part of the identity construction work. I don't know if there's any other question, and I can probably go back to this identity.
Yeah, I have a question, Nancy. The question is, what state is the environment and the destruction of the environment over there, knowing that you are interested in the land? I'm an environmentalist myself. And over here in England and Ireland, we're finding it very hard to bring under control the government's procedures in destruction of the land and ancient trees and ancient woodlands and badger sets. We have badgers over here that's about as wild as we get. And I was just wondering what state your country's in and the wider South America is at.
Mhm. Perfect. Thank you, Stuart, for your question. Like, yeah, we are experiencing great challenges because, again, neoliberalism comes into play, right? So we
Nancy,
could have.
I'm very sorry. Could you just define your liberalism to us, please?
Oh, yeah, sure. I'm sorry. So the neoliberalism is, this idea in economics where they start speaking about the privatization of companies and privatization of institutions like public universities. And under the philosophy of neoliberalism, they speak about this open market where our economies can be strengthened, but the reality is different, right? So this economic model has been instilled in Latin America since the 1980s. It started in Chile, and then it was transferred into some other Latin American countries. And this economic model has taken us as a nation to become individualist, to be competitive. And in terms of the land, which is the question Stuart was asking, like, for example, the government released policies where they prohibited us to grow our own corn seeds. So can you believe that? I mean, like, corn is a native seed to Colombia. We have like 50 varieties of corn. And then the government says, like, hey, you cannot plant that corn seed anymore because we are going to import other seeds that you are supposed to be cultivating. So then in that moment, the resistance of the communities started to come up. Indigenous communities saying, like, no, this is our corn, this is our seed. If we import all other manufactured seeds, with the transgenic humanly manipulated seeds, So they are not even gonna be growing here because their soil is not prepared for that. And there's a lot of problems with all those kinds of mindsets. But anyways, so in that moment that the communities, indigenous communities, have been resistant in fighting for the right to and peasants to cultivate our own corn seeds. So in Colombia, in the present, is still a huge struggle in order to preserve our native plants, our native seeds, in order for not bringing all this fracking into place. So we have like leaders, female leaders in the territories, asking and organizing communities in order to prevent fracking from being brought into the country. We have fracking already in the northern part of the country. And we have had a lot of, unfortunately, social leaders murdered because of this struggle. So I don't know. I don't know what the situation is in Ireland, Stuart. So probably you can tell me a little bit more. But for us in Colombia, to demand the rights of the land represents losing our lives, right?
And I also wanted to ask you what women you admire or aspire to.
Well, I think that Colombia has advanced in generating different policies that are in terms of defending human rights for women, and how we can start advancing agendas in terms of equity and the places that we occupy in politics. I think that in Colombia, like in many other parts of the world, we still experience challenges, even with our own bodies, right? How to demand for respect, or how the ways we want to look, the ways we want to dress, and the ways we want to portray or represent ourselves in different scenarios, right? So there is a lot of harassment going on institutionally speaking. There's a lot of diminishing the word of a woman when we occupy places of in administration. For example, I am occupying now a kind of a position in an administrative level at the university that I work for. But sometimes we find that when an idea comes from a woman, it needs to be validated by a man to be listened, right? So that's part of the struggle that I have experienced for 2 years, persisting on agendas that I want to bring for academics for this university. And then also what I was saying, how to feel safe for us to walk on the streets, how to feel safe in loving relationships when people don't think that they can control our bodies, or that they can, abuse from our bodies, of our mindsets, just for being a woman, and just because they think we are weak, or whatever it is. So I think that being a woman still means like, or it still, yeah, represents huge challenges financially speaking in the places we occupy. But I think that as societies, this talks to the challenges that we experience as societies, and the cultures we have been raised by. How can we move from those stereotypical views in terms of who a woman can be, or a man can be, and what are the gender's roles that we are performing. Even the colors, when the boys are born, they wear blue and the girls wear pink, and girls can only play with dolls and boys cannot cry. So still, socioculturally speaking, we are experiencing huge challenges in how we are raising our children, how we are educating both of them, male and female, so that they can embrace their emotions. They can be the ones, the selves or the humans they want to be in the midst of diversity. We are also a country that's experiencing racism as well. So again, so we need to acknowledge and go back to our indigenous roots and African roots, and we are mestizo, right? So we are mestizo people who need to really be aware of the value of who we are, because of the whole mixture of cultures and parts in our identities that has been created. So that's part of the challenges we still experience. But I am hopeful. I mean, there's a lot of powerful people in general in Colombia, men and women, and transgender women, and diverse indigenous communities that are still in the territories doing our little piece, like in whatever spaces we occupy. I also remind my students and my colleagues that as moms, as sisters, as a common citizen, when getting on the bus, public transportation, when talking to somebody in the store, we are already making a difference there in how we treat one another, in how we embrace one another, in how we listen and care one another. Because at the end of the day, we are brothers and sisters, like all of us here. We are just brothers and sisters occupying different territories, with different life journeys, so that every one of us is going to develop different understandings, and hopefully we are nurturing our consciousness that when we pass away, hopefully we will continue evolving according to those lessons that we have learned here on earth, right? So at the end of the day, that's all who we are, and we are all making a difference on a daily basis with the discourses that we use and all the other elements that I mentioned, right? And then women that I admire too, women in my family, you know, for the strength, for having been the women who, despite all the economic difficulties and despite the violence in the territories, they could still raise a family. They are still, my mom is a grandmother now who's teaching a new generation about how to be loving and caring, and she's still serving the communities. So those are part of the women. And also all of these, you know, Chicana, Latina, the social leaders in the country, like my respect to them, like every time I talk to them is like, wow, I don't have words. I just have to sit and listen. I mean, I've been figuring out, I always tell the social leaders in Colombia, like, hey, as members of the communities and society, what can we do to protect your lives? I mean, like, how can we organize? Let's create, I don't know, a new technological device so that we can communicate, and whenever anyone is in danger, so we can do something, right? So for social leaders, they've been trenching, like they've been changing from one place to another. They've been using different resources and different strategies so that they can still preserve their lives. So those are powerful women. Like we have an African descendant woman that is called Francia Marquez, and she's working towards becoming the next president in Colombia. So we have two hopeful years for Francia Marquez to hopefully, and she's been working with the communities defending the territories from fracking and all these environmental issues. Those are women that I really look up to, that I'm in contact with, that I am in dialogue with, so that I can learn from them. And then also my mentors in academia, Chicana, Latina, feminists, indigenous women that I know from Australia, from England, from the US, from New Zealand, who have allowed me to really embrace my mind, body, and spirit, and have allowed me to use a different language and a different discourse when speaking in academia and in research. So that for me is like those women. Gloria Ansaldúa is my mentor. She passed away like 10, 15 years ago, and then I never met her in person. But when you read one of her books or when you read her words, then you find a place for yourself. Like she really is like, wow, like, yeah, you're right. Like, yeah, I am not the only one experiencing this. Like, yeah, you're right. It's important to write about this because my story may represent something for somebody. When I read Gloria Ansaldúa, yeah, you're right. Like we are human beings who are always reconstructing ourselves, and we are not the labels they imposed upon us. We are more than the labels. We are not the labels. So we
Yeah.
are more than
It's
that.
funny that you touched on a couple of things, particularly gender stereotypes. Because I always laugh. My sister's little girl won't wear pink, won't wear anything fluffy, doesn't like dolls, wants to dress up as Spider-Man for Halloween, and my sister's like, let her off. So I think there's definitely, you know, work to be done on the ground to encourage individualism and not pigeonhole individuals into traditional roles. I think that's fascinating. I think, you know, I could speak to you all day. You are certainly a role model for not just for women, but for you know, general empowerment. So I suppose where does your passion for, you know, in a world definitely, as I referred to earlier, that is so much about narcissism and so much about self-image and trivial nonsense, for want of a better word. In some ways, this COVID thing has been positive in the sense that it's stripped a lot of the crap back and made people just live simple lives without posting on social media that they're going to Lanzarote or doing this and having a wonderful life. With the up and coming generations and those challenges, because obviously the likes of myself or yourself or from that generation wouldn't have had those outlets, that need to promote a lifestyle or a happy life. How do you think we work beyond that type of triviality and, you know, encourage people to look towards, you know, a knowledge of empathy and humanitarianism in a world that seems to contradict that, that seems
Mhm.
to like, in my opinion, the gap between the haves and the have-nots seems to be widening.
Mhm.
So with individuals like yourself, you know, it's an uphill struggle
Mhm.
to give a voice to people who don't have a voice. So I suppose I wanted to, I know that's a bit of a mouthful, but I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Like, yeah, from my experience, I think that's why I think or consider that education is key, you know. So educators, we do have an important role and impact on other people's lives into bringing communal perspectives, right? Into bringing the respect of the different ways our bodies look like, the different abilities we have, the different skin colors we have, the different, roots that we are part of, and the different places we're coming from. So I think that education is one of the transformational resources or sites that can really create generations of human beings that think communally, that think from a we standpoint, right? And that we can start moving away from competition and individualism, right? So that's why I keep on teaching pre-service teachers, and that's why I keep teachers that are already there in the field and trying to invite them to look at their classrooms from a different perspectives. And I tell them that we have only two choices as educators. And one choice is you traumatize those kids, you tell them that, send them the wrong message that, learning whatever language is difficult and they cannot do it. Or we give them the other alternative, and is we offer a space where they can feel safe, where they can continue developing understandings of who we are, relating to one another in loving, caring ways, approaching one another from difference, right? And then understanding what's the value in living, right? So I think that education is my side of contribution, right? In the classroom, with educators, with the policies that we are creating. Like recently, I had a policy for the university that was approved by the council. And I think that this is again institutionally speaking, because in this policy, we speak about diversity. And then I bring all this notion of sexual orientation, and then I bring this notion of ethnicity as part of the definition of diversity, right? So this policy for the university is very important because we're speaking about equity, we're speaking about multiculturalism. So hopefully now the next stage is, because we cannot rely on policies only. I mean, like, the policies can be beautifully written and we can have all the policies about equity in the nation. But if we don't start going to the basis, to the educators, to the administrators, to the students, in order to transform the discriminatory and hateful cultures that we are immersed in, so the policies will not make any sense, right? So
Hmm.
I've been working for 2 years into, okay, so let's create a policy, but at the same time, let's open spaces of dialogue, let's connect, let's bring the arts. Arts are a powerful means of connection as well. Arts are a powerful mean of giving voice or offering a space for voices that are not commonly listened to. And also arts as are a place of healing, right? So in my work, working with houseless people in the United States, in rural areas, so we understood that arts were a ways for us to make sense of the meaning of home, right? So what does home mean to all of us experiencing rural homelessness? And then, so yeah, so the arts is a powerful place to go to. We have a lot of struggles and challenges, but then I think that everyone from whatever spaces we occupy, as I was saying before, we can make a difference. And education is my side of, you know, my family as well, with my nephews and my nieces, the messages that I send them, like, yeah, we can do anything together. And then I, of course, invited to think and see things differently. So yeah, so we can all, we are already making a difference in whatever spaces we occupy.
Say one thing in thanks. I heard, I think it was Audrey Hepburn who said it, and just listening to you, it came into my head. The guys will tell you I'm always coming up with quotes or whatever that pop into my head. Um, but she said, you know, you're given two hands in life, one to help yourself and one to help others. And I think you're, you know, the living example of somebody who lives out their life in that regard. So I thank you for your time. And as the others said, we're looking forward to hopefully talking to you again and establishing um, relationships, universal relationships. So thank you. I've really enjoyed chatting to you.
Yeah, I really like to thank you for your generous words, for having been present here with mind, body, and spirit. I know that many of the things that we said here today will continue to resonate, as Grain was saying, in the coming days, in the coming months, in the coming years. And then I would like us, for each one of us, to honor our lives and our paths, right? So let us not compare ourselves and our journeys, because we all have experienced different struggles. So I couldn't probably talk about some of the hardest struggles in my life today. But then, like, let us not compare to our journeys, because our journeys have been designed for every one of us to learn the lessons that we are meant to learn, right? Like, every single step that we have given, right, has been given for a purpose. And then the important question to ask from now on is, what is coming next, and what is it that I want to learn next, and how am I going to respond to that challenge in my life, right? So what is going to make a difference in my understandings is the ways in which I decide to experience that new struggle or that new challenge in my life, right? I can obviously make the decision to close my eyes, to stay in the dark and not to look at anything else, to think that there is not a way out, and that's perfectly fine, right? But then if you stay in that emotion or that feeling for a moment, but I know that all of us will have the strength and the courage in order to move away from the dark and say, oh, there is a way out, right? And there is somebody for me at least to listen. I know, like, when we become listeners of others, we are also doing, I mean, we are contributing a lot, right? Because sometimes all what we need is a person who listens, a person who cares, a person who listens without judgment, you know, without all these ideas, prejudices, and stereotypes. So, my dear beautiful people, the message is, like, all of us are at the stage that we have been meant to be, right? And in all of us is the decisions that we can make in how we want to experience the struggles and challenges that will continue to come into our lives. And in all of us, and in the small decisions that we make are going to make a difference in what is coming next in our journeys, right? So I hope that every experience that you get from now on continues to enrich your vision, responds to your passion, you know, whatever you feel passionate about. If you have not allowed yourselves to feel or embrace that passion, so probably today or probably in 1 week, that will be the right moment for you to do it. But embrace your passion. We have only one existence. And thinking about that is what makes me think like I don't have time to waste. And I am getting older very quickly, so we don't have time to waste. As Dean was saying, we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do at many different angles. And let's choose one little piece of work, right? Let us not be helpless, because of course we cannot save the world, we cannot save our families, we cannot change the institutions completely, but at least we can create safe spaces, nice spaces of encounter where we can be fully happy and other people can also embrace their wholeness. So yeah, so I don't have time, let's say, much time left. We don't know, life is uncertain, coronavirus has presented a new challenge to us, but at least let's express those people that we love them, right? So let's speak about those things we have in our hearts and we haven't talked to people about that. So let us not postpone the conversations. Let us not postpone all the manifestations of love and appreciation and gratitude that we have towards people. And be sure that although you might think at sometimes that you are alone, that nobody loves you, that nobody cares about you, be sure that there's one person at least in Colombia thinking of every one of you and remembering this moment and honoring and praying for all of you, so that we can all learn the lessons we are meant to learn, and that all of us stay well, and that hopefully in the future we'll meet in person, and that if we don't, we have technology to bring us together. So Larissa and everyone in the organizations who have been present today, thank you so much. This is a space that stays in my heart, is very dear to my heart. And yeah, so welcome anytime to Colombia if you ever come here. And my love, my gratitude, my appreciation, my respect for all the work that you do, you've been doing, and that you are doing and continue to do.